Starfield just got a bunch of additional details. Although that teaser trailer was okay, it wasn't the most hyped thing, at least for me, and honestly my hype levels increased significantly more from some of the ensuing interviews and other details shared online. And well, the day after E3, Todd Howard participated in yet another interview, this getting a bit more into what Starfield actually is, and sharing several pretty big revelations about the game and what exactly we can expect from it. So in this video we're going to go over that, but also some additional discoveries found from this behind the scenes video. It was uploaded in 4K, so we could read a bunch of employee screens, and actually on one of them is a ton of super interesting information, some of the most interesting info shared thus far in the game. But first off, let's jump into this new Telegraph interview with Todd Howard. In this, he opens it up by saying that Starfield is both a first and third person game like some of their previous games. First person continues to be the primary style it's designed around though. Also, something pretty interesting, it's going to be a bit more of a hardcore role-playing game compared to their past games. It'll feature good character systems like choosing your background, and even in a different interview we heard how some of your initial character customization choices will impact the game overall / story to some degree. Now obviously this far out it's all pretty high level or vague what he's talking about, but it seems like this will have some deeper RPG mechanics and probably in the way of character creation, perhaps something like a life path system from Cyberpunk, but either way that's pretty interesting. In Fallout 4 of course there was a bit of pullback on those RPG systems. It was definitely a lighter RPG, at least compared to Skyrim, but even in Skyrim it's not like one of the most hardcore RPGs out there, and it'll be interesting to see how in depth Bethesda gets with it here. Which on that note they actually do describe, we're going back to some things that we used to do in our games long ago that we felt have really let players express the characters they want to be. And it's going to be interesting to see if this is more like Oblivion or Morrowind or more like Skyrim. We know to some degree it was likened to Skyrim in space, and Bethesda has described how this game should feature both a story they're wanting to tell, but stories you can carve out for yourself with your character and the uniqueness you could create with your character. But Todd goes on to describe how it has large-scale goals and storytelling, but that makes minute to minute feel rewarding for you, and if you just want to pass the time and go watch the sunset and pick flowers, it's rewarding in that way too. The quiet moments feel really good, and seemingly this will be a proper open world game. It's not going to drag you by the nose and say you must do X, Y, or Z, which I'm personally a huge fan of. I hate games that kind of lock you down for the first like 2 hours. One of the worst examples being Red Dead Redemption 2. That was absolute misery for me. Starfield is described as a game that says yes to a lot of the miscellaneous things. So Todd has talked about this a bit in the past, but basically when you first get into the world and you have all those questions like what can you actually do in Starfield? Can you pick this up? Can you do this? What happens if you do this? A lot of those have a yes answer with this game. And he has described in other interviews how this game should have the most yeses out of any of the Bethesda Game Studios games thus far. The game's art style is described as NASA punk. It isn't quite Star Wars or Star Trek, it really fits out into its own niche. And one of the big defining aspects of this is the game, despite being set several hundred years in the future, 300 to be exact, does very much so have a sense of reality to it. It really seems like, based off what we've seen and heard thus far, they're trying to make Starfield kind of teeter the line between far future and more near future, in that the technology should be somewhat recognizable, but of course it is still very futuristic and a sci-fi game. This is being described more explicitly with how the ship design has several connections to more modern day ships. It's not hyperfuture or out of this world. There's a ton of weapons in this game, guns and other things, but some of the more exotic weapons feel exotic in the reality set by this game. And also lasers are confirmed to be a thing, not that that's really a big shocker here. And on the topic of this being a bit more grounded in reality, Todd actually visited SpaceX. We heard about that back in 2019, but he did this specifically so he could talk to people who could see further than what I was seeing right now. And what he wanted to do with this was kind of establish the rules of the technology in Starfield. In other interviews, he described going decade by decade to establish some of the major events and technological advancements that happen in between modern day and the 300 years in the future. And via this, he has established ways to actually justify the power behind equipment, the technology in that game. In Fallout, you have radiation and crazy tech. In Skyrim, you have magic, but in Starfield, it has its own thing. And we'll touch more back on this in a little while. He describes how you are part of Constellation. So you get this Explorer's Watch, sounds very reminiscent to being part of a vault and getting a Pip-Boy. And this Explorer Watch is supposedly part of your identity. Again, sounding very similar to a Pip-Boy. It seems like the Explorer's Watch may fundamentally be kind of similar to the Pip-Boy, a justification for the HUD or details we have on our screen. We've seen some of these in those leaked images. We've had a look at the watch based off some of the behind the scenes videos, although this is actually a real world rendition of the watch, likely going to be a collector's edition item. He does confirm alien races are a thing in Starfield, but they have a specific way they approach it with a grounded nature. Although he won't go into that just yet. I'm pretty curious about this one. I don't know exactly what it means. We're going to touch more about what the big mystery in Starfield could be in this particular image. It clearly seems to have some kind of alien origin, so a lot of people have been speculating, is Starfield a first contact story, or what is this unique approach to aliens? It makes it seem like it's not going to be quite as simple as the fact that the alien is just some creature we can talk to in typical dialogue. We've seen some aliens in one of the pieces of concept art. They definitely don't look like more traditional humanoids, or honestly, they don't even really look like they would talk to us, but probably just try to eat us. But even beyond the alien races, Starfield will also have planets to explore and cities that are built like cities that Bethesda has built in some of their past games. There are a lot of locations that will hopefully be rewarding to explore. Starfield being described as an enormous game designed to be explored. That's a major focus here, which honestly gets me super excited. We've seen a ton of concept art now that shows all kinds of different locales. If all of these different locations make into the game, that's kind of crazy. They all seem giant relative to if you look at the concept art of, let's say, Skyrim or the concept art of Fallout 4. Todd also expands on this by saying Starfield is being designed to be played for a long time to come. It gets some more hooks in it for that we added later to a game like Skyrim, while still making sure that somebody who just wants to play it and go through the main quests and win or feel they've accomplished something large is doable. And it's described as hundreds of hours of gameplay big. So to me, what this probably means is just the repeatability, or perhaps some aspects of the randomness in this will just be on a different level compared to other games. With the exploration being such a big part, you have to wonder if there'll be things like procedurally generated planets, or if procedural generation will play a role. Another thing I suspect we see here is just a whole different level to the AI and world reactiveness. Like perhaps if you make decisions, you can affect entire economies on specific planets. That's one of those things that's been tossed around as a hypothetical with this game. But of course, if your decisions are having that degree of an impact on others, you could easily see how this could have a ton of replayability and how the ripple effects of individual decisions could really incentivize subsequent playthroughs for this game. Starfield is also described very much so as a next-gen game made for high-end PCs and the Xbox Series X/S. If you haven't seen, this is not going to be on the older gen, not on Xbox One, but Todd does describe how they learned a lot about just trying to make it the best they could for these systems. It helped a lot with the loading and fidelity of the game. The timing of the hardware release, that being that Starfield is releasing just a couple of years after a new next-gen Xbox, has allowed them to set the bar really, really high with this one. He does get a question on PlayStation if he feels like he had to pick a side only being on Xbox. He does respond, pick a side meaning PlayStation, is that what you mean? Well, a little bit. You never want to leave people out, right? But at the end of the day, your ability to focus and say, this is the game I want to make, these are the platforms I want to make it on, and being able to really lean on those is going to make for a better product. Then we get a pretty interesting question/response. It does say, as a gamer, is there a part of Howard that regrets his games won't be playable on PlayStation anymore? And then he begins to respond, well, we're still ... and then he corrects himself. I will just say I want everybody to have the ability to play it in some fashion. Not really sure what this could be around. It could be around like maybe xCloud or some kind of streaming coming to PlayStation, so maybe you can't get it directly, but you could get it via, let's say, Game Pass on PlayStation. It'd kind of be a crazy move in gaming if that actually happened, but it is definitely seems like something and not just nothing. And then finally from this interview, we've had to do some new engineering around how the game is given to people, this being internal employees at Bethesda. There's been some really cool work some parts of our company have done to let people stream the game and someone else control it, because Bethesda was having issues with that. A game is, well, a lot of data. You have to download many gigabytes. So if you're consistently pushing new and updated builds, that's going to spend a lot of time just sitting there waiting for the build to download. Overall, it's definitely a really interesting interview. It is nice to get yet another inside look at what Starfield is going to be. I have a feeling over the next 16 months or so, we're going to be reading a lot of Todd Howard interviews. I think we're still a ways away from more trailers, gameplay, etc., but perhaps the occasional concept art or a screenshot or two down the line. I have a feeling this game's going to have a much longer marketing cycle and just have a trickle of details over the long term. I definitely don't think Todd Howard is just going to shut up until next E3. I think we're going to have periodic interviews to go over. Although, outside of that, there was some other information to come out. It was confirmed by Nanzur that he is doing the soundtrack for this game. It was highly suspected, but it's nice to actually just see it get confirmed. We did get the 4K version of the Into the Starfield video, and as a result of it being 4K instead of 480p in the old version, you can break down and just see a lot more. And this has actually revealed some very, very interesting stuff. Straight off the bat, we got a ton of that concept art in 4K, so it makes for absolutely phenomenal desktop wallpapers. I'll have a link to an album down below if you want one for yourself. But then we also got our first piece of actual lore, a note from Starfield. This was spotted during the video on Emil's screen, Emil being the design director at Bethesda Game Studios. And I'm just going to read through this one first because there is a lot of details in it. So it describes how it should have the United Colonies logo at the top, the SysDef logo below it to the left, and the UC Vanguard logo below it to the right. And it starts off with urgent communique. Please be on alert. Pirates of the Crimson Fleet have extended far beyond the Crix system and have established footholds in the Sagan, Cheyenne, Lunara, and Narukon systems. That last one's kind of hard to make out. Both SysDef and the Vanguard are committed to ridding United Colonies space of these parasites. This is clearly no longer just a Freestar collective problem. Also be advised that the Crimson Fleet is not a single organized entity or faction, rather it is a loose confederation of individual captains, all organized under the same banner. Shown here is the symbol or Jolly Roger they've adopted. Anyone displaying that symbol is assumed to be associated with the Crimson Fleet and can be terminated, and then just cuts off. Then an image of the Crimson Fleet logo. Any questions should be addressed to Lieutenant John Tuwala at mast for the Vanguard and Commander Kibwe Akande, I think, aboard the UC Vigilance for SysDef. And then he does sign it, UC Fleet Admiral Pasquale Logan, mast Military Administrative Scientific Triumvirate, New Atlantis, Planet Jemison, Alpha Centauri. So this feels huge and like a super crazy thing to be shared in this documentary. It seems very deliberate. Like I imagine they knew this would be leaked out and people would read it, etc. But just think about how many things I just said that don't really make a ton of sense and that we don't know the context or backstory. They named numerous factions, numerous systems, and several people during this. I think it actually illustrates really well how big the lore of Starfield is actually going to be. Just the scale of the unknown here. Unknown to us, of course, once you actually play the game, you will understand or learn about all of this. But to summarize this, there's basically this pirate fleet that is attacking a bunch of ships and invading territory it's not supposed to be. So now these are kind of a group of people who are going to react or respond to that to defend their areas. One of the most interesting parts to me is about all these different systems we hear about. That being 6 different systems in total. Each of these systems should hypothetically have several planets to it. And even this ending part seems to be this person's location, that with New Atlantis, Planet Jemison, Alpha Centauri. So it's assumed by many that this is New Atlantis, this being one of the concept art images, that because it is in the water, of course. But Alpha Centauri is actually pretty interesting in that it is a real world star system, actually the closest one to Earth, although Earth isn't a part of it. And if we're dealing with things on the scale of individual systems, that's pretty huge. Alpha Centauri alone has 4 distinct planets as well as 3 stars occupying the system. It seems like we might have a lot of friggin' planets to explore. I don't want to get overhyped because we of course don't know what the scale of this will be. Can you really go to all these different systems, or maybe a bunch are just mentioned and you can't travel there? But to me, this definitely makes it seem like we'll be able to travel to many different locations. Before release, a lot of people were speculating that Starfield would have like 3 or 4 planets, and I think after reading this, it feels like it might be more than that. Even just seeing the concept art, it definitely feels like it'll be more locations than 4. And something else interesting to build off of this, if you look back at the actual Starfield teaser trailer, on this mirror you can see something pretty interesting written. This poking fun at Sedania Security, how they don't actually have a sense of humor. So it was realized that Sedania is actually one of the specific regions on Mars, that being this Mars, the Mars in our own solar system, which would suggest that at least part of this game takes place in our own solar system with our own planets. And then also we're seeing mentions of different star systems around us. Just putting this all together, it really makes me hungry to know more. What is the scale of this exploration? Because it obviously could be insane or could be limited in some way. Either way, this definitely looks really interesting. Although something else that is really cool that we could see during this behind the scenes video is at one point we could see an employee editing the trailer world space in the creation kit. This is actually kind of big for a couple of reasons. On one hand, this means that the trailer is very much so representative of what the game will look like. The creation kit kit is what is used to make the game. Modders use it, Bethesda uses it to create the game themselves. And although the trailer was labeled as kind of being an alpha in game, to me this is more clear that, okay, this trailer is going to be pretty representative of what the final product actually looks like. But also, if they are sticking with the creation kit, it likely means this game will have a similar degree of moddability compared to other games. Although one final thing I wanted to touch on in this video was this mysterious structure in the sketch during this trailer. This seems like it's something pretty significant. We get one shot where it is just panning on this sketch. And on this, Todd Howard has said this is something mysterious, or he didn't really want to give away what exactly is going on here. Well, one of the things that has been noticed is it seems like whatever is sketched here is also featured prominently in this cover art drawn for Starfield. And seemingly, if it's getting a prominent trailer shot and also in the middle of the cover image, it's something significant in the story overall, not just some random sketch. There's already been a ton of speculation as to what this could be. Starfield is described in a couple of ways that seem irrelevant here, as humanity trying to answer its greatest mystery. During the trailer, it says, "What you found, it's the key to unlocking everything." And on the sketch specifically, it does say, "We have so far been unable to determine what happens in the center." So it definitely seems like this is going to be a very relevant thing to the plot of the story overall, or the key to something, to answering the big question. Todd Howard in the Washington Post interview did describe how Starfield will be looking at some big and pretty heavy questions. It's going to deal with topics such as religion, science, etc. And you have to imagine, to a degree, it could all be pivoting around this. As a result, one of the things that has popped up for me is, could one of the big questions, or this great mystery facing humankind, be around how life was created on Earth, or the origins of humans, something along those lines? The structure clearly looks alien in nature. Perhaps it is connected to this unique aspect to aliens Todd Howard describes. Although in the cover art version of this, it almost kind of resembles like that portal effect we saw during the original Starfield teaser. Like, it almost looks like we get sucked into something during that original teaser. This looks like it is creating some kind of beam that has a similar effect. Maybe this is a teleporter we got sucked into or went into. It moves us to a different part of the universe, something along those lines. Either way, I imagine whatever this thing is, it's going to be very relevant in the future and with whatever the story of Starfield is. That's all I have for this one. That is the day 2 of the kind of info dump and additional details on Starfield. For me, at least, the hype levels are continuing to build. I hope you guys found this one informative or entertaining. But with all that said, I thank you all again for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.